Good morning. It's 11 o'clock and I'm just going to give it a couple of moments just to let people join the webinar. I can see those numbers rising, but we'll make a start. Good morning, everyone, and welcome to our December webinar. What I thought we would do this month is take a little look back at some of the changes that happened in employment law and in immigration as well. And some of you are probably thinking, well, I know what happened, and quite frankly, some of it I'd much rather forget. But I think what I thought we would do is have a look at the changes in terms of how they have impacted on you as HR professionals or on your businesses, and also on your strategic planning when we think about moving into 2023. Chris Harber, our head of immigration, is joining me today to talk about those immigration changes. So morning, Chris, nice to see you.
Good to see you too, Emma. Thank you ever so much for having me.
And I think for 2022, from my perspective, it's really been a mixed bag. I would say growth has been a big part of 2022. Certainly some exciting businesses, particularly looking at moving into new areas and new markets. I've been doing a lot of international work, which is absolutely fantastic. I'd also say that 2022 has been a year of consolidation. And by that, I mean businesses, kind of working out where they want to be, who they want to be, where they are in terms of their brand and their image, thinking about how their people work and where their people work. So for me, it has been a really kind of mixed bag. It'd be interesting, pop your thoughts in the chat as well about maybe what 2022 has meant for you as an HR professional, but also as a business. And Chris, I wonder, whether, looking at things from an immigration perspective as well, what's kind of been your sort of take on 2022?
So 2022, for anyone on the call who is an active user of the immigration system in the UK, will be aware that it's been probably the most operationally challenging year that we have seen, certainly in recent memory from an immigration perspective. So there were a number of winds that were blowing the Home Office ship off, of course, this year, and really it started on a bad foot with a hangover from the lockdowns from last year, dragging on the operational sort of efficiency issues into this year. And so the Home Office very much started the year already in a bad place, where they had probably not enough staff fundamentally to have to process applications, and we were already seeing in January some issues starting to creep in, with processing times creeping out, policy announcements being delayed and things like that. And that was really knocked completely off course by the Russian invasion of Ukraine. So understandably, the Home Office divert a significant amount of resource to handle the visa applications for Ukrainian refugees trying to flee the country. And obviously there was all the press and the media interest at the time around the delays and the issues of the initial uptake. And that was very, very systematic of the wider issue that the Home Office had responding. They're not particularly good at responding quickly to these sorts of events and actions, and it took them a good couple of weeks to get at least a basic framework of a procedure in place. And so that really sets the economic migration basis, the work visas that we typically see and assist with, that not that completely out of the way. It took until the middle of the summer to get back to a certain degree of recovery on that. We're still seeing some hangovers from it. We're still seeing some issues from that, but things are slowly but surely moving back to normal. The Home Office has also, in the last couple of months, gone through a very significant upgrade on some of their case working systems, and that has been gone smoothly at all, to put it honestly. And that is, again, that's knocked things back again. So it's a constant sort of stage of sort of one step forward, three steps back for the Home Office this year.
And, those things have such a knock-on effect, don't they, on businesses and their planning and obviously timetabling,
Exactly.
particularly when you want to move people quickly from, between countries. Just a bit of housekeeping, really. As you all know, we are live this morning, and it's so great to see so many of you that have not only signed up, but obviously joined us today. And hello to all our people who are watching us via our YouTube channel as well. And that's fantastic. A bit about Boyce Turner. We are a full-service commercial law firm based in the Thames Valley, but we also have a thriving private client and wealth protection team as well, and private clients teams as well. So we really can help with all of your HR, business, commercial and debt recovery, etc., and corporate projects. If you do have any questions or want to get in touch with Chris and I, then please do so. I'll be sharing our details at the end of the session. But again, do email us. We'd love to get your thoughts and your feedback, and also what you want to hear from us next year as well, because obviously, we want to be able to bring you topics and webinars, etc., that you want to hear about. So do get in touch as well. So really just sort of starting off with where we were kind of, at the start of the year. And after a bit of a sort of a mini hiatus, the gender pay gap reporting was sort of back in swing in April for those organisations that have over 250 or more employees. And this really involves, reporting on your mean, your median pay gaps, looking at your bonuses as well, but also putting that information into context. And I think that's really important. And I think a lot of businesses now are being able to show that they are on a journey with regards to gender pay gap and gender pay gap reporting. So it's not just the actual data itself, but the sort of the information behind that and what steps that you are taking as an organization to be able to improve that gender pay gap that you may have. And those eagle-eyed amongst you will have hopefully seen that the ONS published some information regarding gender pay and gender pay gap reporting more generally. And actually it was last month. And actually it was really interesting what they found. And overall, the trend is that the gender pay gap is reducing, which is obviously good news. Bit of an increase this year, which was quite interesting. But I think what we're basically saying is we need to look at that longer term. What are the trends in terms of the longer term there? We've seen that there has been an increase in terms of, a decrease in terms of the pay gap for those higher paid workers, which is a good thing. But what we have seen, and what is very interesting, is we've got this age gap where for the under 40s, that age gap is reducing, and that's absolutely fantastic. So the ONS have reported that for under 40s, that gender pay gap has reduced to 3.2%, and that's been the case since 2017. But when we look at our workers between sort of 40 and 50, that gender pay gap is up to sort of 10.9. And that's really high when we think about the trend overall in terms of gender pay gap and what that means in terms of, encouraging, retaining, supporting those individuals who are in that sort of 40 plus bracket. And again, I've been talking a lot this year, again, about menopause, and really thinking about that demographic, that demographic for women. We are the fastest, growing demographic within the UK workforce, which is hugely significant. And that obviously brings with it some challenges for employers as well, again, about how you can recruit, how you can support, how you can retain individuals who have that wealth of talent. Ethnicity pay gap reporting, again, that was mentioned this year, but the government have said that they are not going to be introducing that as mandatory pay gap reporting. The The reason being is because the government found that actually reporting on ethnicity pay gap may not actually be the most appropriate way to be able to support and actually sort of, raise the issues of equality and diversity within the workforce. So yes, some businesses are choosing to do so voluntarily, but certainly at the moment, ethnicity pay gap reporting is not something that's going to be made mandatory. April's always that date, that month where we like to report on those statutory rate rises, so SMP, etc., statutory adoptive pay, etc. That all increases in April. Similarly, SSP, that increases national minimum wage, and also those rates for compensation. So for any dismissals that happen on or after the 6th of April, we have that rate rise in terms of a week's pay, but also for compensation for unfair dismissal as well. So again, watch this space for those 2023 rates. But again, what do these rate rises mean for businesses, and what changes have we seen? I think really with regards to compensation for unfair dismissal, for that week's pay, certainly as a team, we are incredibly busy when it comes to litigation. And it may be that individuals now are thinking, actually, when you're looking at nearly £100,000 in terms of basic and unfair dismissal as the compensatory award, obviously it's up to or 12 months pay, whichever is the lower. I think, there is this perhaps view that, let's just have a go and let's sort of, put in a claim and see where we get to, because, those rates are huge. And I've talked a lot, when I started back in the dark ages, the maximum compensation limit for unfair dismissal was around about sort of £11,000, £12,000. There's a huge increase there in terms of the rates of compensation. Another trend that, again, it's going to be very interesting to see where we get to is sickness absence more generally. Certainly over the last couple of years, businesses reporting that basically no one was off sick because of, people were working from home. It was quite easy to hide. People weren't reporting their sickness because they would just simply, work from home. And, if they didn't feel particularly well, they would log on later, earlier, etc. So that issue of sickness absence and managing sickness absence, I think, is going to become more prevalent, particularly where businesses have got PHI, particularly where businesses have got very generous sick pay schemes. So it's going to be very interesting to see as we move forward into 2023, just how those sickness absence schemes will be tested and our systems of managing sickness absence as well. So watch out for some sort of training there that might be necessary for our managers on how we do manage sickness absence, because they really are the gatekeeper in these situations. So Chris, that takes me through to sort of April 2022. Then we see some changes, don't we? I don't know why that's not showing, but we've got some changes then that sort of kick in, don't we, with regards to GMB licenses. So I think they come in a bit later, don't they? I think before that, we saw in April and again in June, we saw some changes there to the FitNote system, where we saw the digitization, which is quite a hard word to say, of the FitNote scheme, where basically, the whole point would be that we could do this online to avoid us having to go and see the GP. And another change that we saw in June was that the list of individuals who can sign off those sick notes, those fit notes, has increased as well. So allowing occupational health practitioners, allowing occupational therapists, allowing nurses, pharmacists, and physiotherapists to sign off those sick notes as well. So that's increased, and that's increased in June. And again, I go back to this point about being able to have those mechanisms in place, which allows for basically the systems to manage and track absence. Are you getting those fit notes in? Who is signing them off? Are you seeing that maybe you've got a pharmacist signing off for 1 month, then a doctor, then, I don't know, an occupational therapist? So what have we got there? And how is that all sort of working out in practice? So again, those methods, those tracking methods are going to be incredibly important, with these new systems and this new digitization. So then, Chris, we move, don't we, into April again. April's always that busy time for legislation. It's a busy time for us. It's a busy time, I know, for HR professionals as well. Not least, obviously, in the employment sphere, as we've seen. but also in immigration as well. And we saw some changes, didn't we, Chris, with regards to global mobility. And I'm just hoping Chris is still with me. Okay, so we saw that we had some changes there in the global mobility routes, and that sort of increased the advantage for employers to be able to use those methods at their disposal. And I think this is all linked to obviously the shortage of workers, the shortage of individuals who we've got coming through. And so, you know, there are opportunities there for businesses. So what I'll do is I'll come back to that point when Chris is back and able to join us. 0 hours contracts, love them or hate them. You know, they do get a lot of bad press. They can be overused and abused, but they do give businesses and individuals some flexibility in terms of where they work, when they work, and who they work for. Now, we saw that there was a ban on exclusivity clauses. Now, what do I mean by that? Well, often you would find in a 0 hours contract, there would be something there that would prevent a 0 hours worker from being able to work for other organizations. So it was almost giving that the employer they're obviously their cake and eating it. So what we saw was a change to sort of stop those exclusivity clauses being used. And what we've now seen is that there's been a change to this. So what we've seen is, and there's legislation coming out this month which extends that ban on exclusivity clauses in 0 hours contracts, and that's expected to come into force on the 5th of December. So, Chris, I wonder if you could just take us back, if possible, please, to talk about the global business mobility routes,
yeah,
and obviously how that's impacted on businesses.
Apologies for dropping off there. My internet seems to have a bit of a wobble and everything froze and for a minute. So
Don't
good
worry.
that I was able to fix that fairly quickly. So April this year, we had the launch of a new series of visa routes. Now, this is a slight rebranding on some existing routes, but there is the introduction of a couple of new routes. They're fairly niche, so the use of certainly the new routes that were introduced are very much around the margins of the immigration system, but nevertheless there's value there and there is usage and they are being used by companies. Now, before April, we had what was called the intercompany transfer visas, and this is a globalized standard of visa whereby a global company can transfer existing members of staff to the UK via the ICT routes. The regulations on the category are slightly more relaxed than the skilled worker route, in the sense that you don't need to apply for a specific permission for a particular individual, and there's no English language requirements. So it works really well for your senior workers. So the salary and the skills thresholds for the old intercompany transfer and the new global business mobility routes are slightly higher than the skilled worker routes, but for your more senior, more specialist roles, it's a really good role for if you're moving somewhere on assignment. So in April, the Home Office rebranded the category as the Global Business Mobility routes. And on the slide there, we've got the 5 new subcategories. And the top two, so the senior and specialist worker and the graduate trainee routes are effectively carbon copies of what was in place before. The salary threshold has increased ever so slightly for the senior specialist worker, to 42,400 from 41,500, but really the rest of it is exactly the same for your senior workers. So there are a lot of businesses that use this route, it's business as normal effectively. The new subcategories that were introduced were the secondment worker, the service supplier, and then the UK expansion worker. Now, like I said, these are fairly sort of on the margins, really. They're not large volumes. We're not going to be seeing tens of thousands of applications a year under these routes by any stretch. But nevertheless, they do create an opportunity for the businesses that work in this area. So I'll run through each of them and give a very high-level quick overview as to what each of them do. So the secondment worker is if you don't really have much of a presence in the UK and you operate overseas, but you nevertheless have a license in the UK and you want to send someone on a secondment to the UK for a defined period of time, fulfilling an investment contract in the UK, then there is a facility that you can do this under the secondment worker route. It's slightly more defined than the senior or specialist worker route in some of the categories that you can apply under and the roles that you can do. But it gives you an ability to send specialist staff to the UK for a short period of time under the visa route, which is a little bit more flexible than what existed previously if it's only going to be for a very short period of time. The service supplier route is if you're based overseas and you are providing a service to a UK-based company and you are required to come here for a period of time to fulfill that contract. Again, there are limits on what types of roles you can do, what the value of the investment is into the UK and how the work is going to be used in the UK. But nevertheless, if you are an overseas business and you provide a number of services to the UK, whether that be physical services in terms of manufacturing or building equipment or more digital solutions such as providing IT solutions to companies. Service supplier route offers a few more options than that again are a little bit more flexible and a little bit more relaxed than the senior worker routes. And then finally, we have the UK expansion worker route. So this is if you're a business which is predominantly based overseas and you are looking to expand your operations into the UK. So again, you need to apply for a license to go through part of this process as well. But if you're looking to establish yourself in the UK and set up work, then you can use this route to send your existing staff to the UK for a fixed period of time to get the company set up, get the ball rolling on everything so that you can then use your license to start hiring on a more permanent basis. Like I said, those last three are very much they're much lower volumes than we typically see. The senior or specialist worker category very much is the dominant one here, and we see that continue to be used an awful lot. One of the criticisms of the GBM route is that, and the intra-company principles overall are that since the adaptation and since the introduction of the new skilled work category in December 2020, the ICT route loses an awful lot of its purpose in the sense of it loses its attraction for a business. So if a business is hiring or moving their staff from overseas to the UK, there's a lot of reasons why you'd want to use the skilled worker route now opposed to using the GBM route. So for example, the salary and the skills thresholds are much, much lower than with the GBM routes. So there's a lot more incentive to try and use the skilled worker routes. Also importantly as well, the skilled worker route leads to permanent residency in the UK, whereas the GBM route obviously doesn't. Now the Home Office haven't really addressed these issues or concerns head on really. They kind of dealt with it in the round really. In the sense of they still think that there is a purpose for the GBM route. They still think that there is a clear reason as to why businesses should want to choose to use the GBM route over the skilled worker route. The primary one for that is speed, really. So if you're transferring an existing member of staff and they would ordinarily need to provide evidence of their English language ability as part of their visa application. Under the GBM route, you don't need to provide any evidence of English language ability. So whether it be if there are any slight concerns over that, whether they are technically going to be able to meet the requirements or just the time frame of being able to book an English language test if they need one, that removes that element of uncertainty in the time frame as well. Also, really importantly, with the global business route, as I said at the beginning of the call, you can assign sponsorship for this directly from your license if you have an allocation in place already. Whereas with the skilled worker route, you need to apply on a case-by-case basis for effectively pre-approval to be able to sponsor someone. So as long as you have an allocation in place, you can move very, very fast with a global business mobility visa, much faster than you can with a skilled worker visa, for example. So it's still got some utility, still got some use, but that use is waning since the advent of the skilled worker route.
What are you finding? Are you finding that people are using this GBM route?
We are seeing it quite a lot. So we are seeing plenty of our clients still using GBM on a frequent basis. The primary reason for it is speed and not having to worry about going through the English language process. What we're seeing increasingly is that companies are using the GBM routes for European nationals who are transferring to the UK. So we haven't really seen a drop-off in professional migration to the UK from the EU since we left. Okay. So companies are still sending their staff to the UK as they would have done prior to Brexit. And there is just now a visa barrier that needs to be overcome. So obviously for almost all European Union countries, English is not their first language. So if they wanted to apply to the skilled worker routes, then they would need to go through the English language test process first of all. Quite often it can take you sort of 4 to 6 weeks to get tested and to get the results. And so that creates an immediate delay in the movement.
Yes.
And quite often the time frames around moving are quite condensed. They're very short. So you want to get someone on site fairly quickly. And so the GBM route offers a fantastic solution in that regard, especially where the person's only come into the UK for sort of 2 or 3 years on an assignment, for example.
Yeah, and I think that ability, as you said, to be able to use your existing sponsorship license without having all that uncertainty and delay of going through that skilled worker, doing it on that case-by-case basis, as you described. I think, there are some benefits there, particularly, if we think about the clients that we're acting for, Chris, that want that speed and that certainty of being able to get people in. So again, if your business is in that sort of, in that marketplace where you're wanting to sort of move people quickly, wanting to recruit and move people from abroad, then, this might be the route for you. But, get in touch and discuss what those options are, because often there is a solution there that we can find for you.
Absolutely.
And recruitment, this has been kind of the buzzword, and I guess, we've got this other sort of, added pressure at this time of strikes, in various sort of, public sector bodies and in private sector as well. And, we saw, didn't we, much talk during the leadership campaign, one of the leadership campaigns about, how we can use legislation to be able to, get staff in and get staff to sort of fill those roles where staff are striking. And yes, we saw a change in the law in June, but again, how effective that's going to be, particularly where you've got, the issue of, well, can we use agency workers? Do they have the sufficient skills that we need to be able to fulfill the roles of the individuals who are undertaking in strike action? And also, do the agency workers want to do the work as well? Do they want to cross the sort of the picket line? So, and again, how quickly can businesses pivot really in terms of being able to use other sources of workers to cover? So again, yes, we've seen some change in the law, change in the legislation. But how effective that will be and how effective that is obviously yet to be seen. August, again, was a big month where we saw some changes, didn't we, Chris, and sort of the scale up visa. So what is that, and how can businesses utilise that visa?
Yeah, so this largely came out of the Khalifa review, which was a review into the UK's financial services and predominantly fintech services that was published towards the end of last year. And Rishi Sunak, when he was Chancellor, made a number of commitments off the back of the Khalifa review around improving the ability for UK scale-up businesses and UK startups who are moving into the scale-up end of the market to be able to recruit the staff they need quickly and effectively. So just as a sort of background in terms of the terminology and in terms of the way that the Home Office define this, obviously if a scale-up is the next step on from a startup. So you set your business up, you've had really good growth initially, and scale up is when you start to really sort of hit the ground in terms of running. So you've got your business off the ground, you've got a really good proposition you're taking out, and you're in that rapid growth phase where you're having to keep up with growth and you're having to react quickly in terms of staffing and your ability to keep servicing your clients' requirements. So there are a number of ways that the Chancellor said that we were going to improve the ability for businesses to hire the staff that they needed for this. And the primary one area of this is what's called the scale-up visa. So scale-up, in order to be able to use a scale-up visa, you need to have a sponsor license in the same way that you need to have a license for the skilled worker and the global business mobility routes. Once you have the license and you go through the process, you can use it to sponsor people under this category. And it's a little bit more relaxed and a little bit easier than it is than on the normal process. So there are some attractions as to why we're doing it. Now, in terms of how you are eligible for a scale-up business, the Home Office have a set criteria as to how they determine whether you're classed as a scale-up business effectively. So the way that the Home Office define it is that in the 3-year period immediately before you apply for the sponsor license, you as a business need to have grown on average 20% every year, each year. And they measure that through your turnover. And then you also need to have had at least 10 employees at the start of the 3-year period. So you're showing that consistent, regular, very quick, very rapid growth over a set period of time. There are some elements that we've seen where they've introduced elements, and I do very, very limited elements of discretion around COVID. So if your turnover was impacted by COVID negatively, then the Home Office are willing to consider a slightly different 3-year period. In the sense of, for example, if you've been trading for 5 or 6 years, then you can go back a little bit further and sort of make an explanation, as long as you can show the recovery since COVID as well. I have seen some analysis on it that the Home Office are willing to consider some slightly different ways of meeting the requirements in that sense. So as long as you're eligible and you've got your license, you go through that, you can then start to sponsor individuals who come to the UK under the skilled worker route. The scale-up visa route. Now, in terms of the types of roles that you can offer, they are slightly different to the skilled worker and the GBM route. The salary threshold is a little bit higher, so it's targeting much more sort of, skilled roles than the skilled worker route is. So the general threshold for the skilled worker route is 25,600, whereas the general threshold for the scale-up route is £33,000 a year. So the salary thresholds are a little bit higher. The skills threshold is there as well, so you still need to make sure that the role meets an eligible skills threshold. Typically speaking, if you're in a scale-up type business and you're recruiting for, let's say, for example, digital roles, so whether it be software engineers or IT architects or business analysts and things like this, then most of these types of roles are going to be eligible under the route. The big attraction with the scale-up visa is that the immigration skills charge does not apply to the scale-up route. Now, this is very much a big incentive that has been introduced with this. So under the GBM and the skilled worker routes, unless there are very specific role exemptions and background exemptions based on whether someone was studying in the UK or not, you need to pay the skills charge for everyone you sponsor. So that is £1,000 per year for the length of visa that you're applying for. And you pay that up front. So for example, if you're applying for a 5-year visa for someone, you pay £5,000 up front. It is lower than that if you're considered a small business in the legal definition of what a small business is. That it drops to £364 a year. nevertheless, it's still a good, it's still a lump of money that you need to invest up front, and it is just effectively a payment you need to make to the Home Office up front. You do get refunds if someone leaves you within the length of their visa, but it's still for a lot of businesses, it's a burden which they can't get over in terms of the cash investment, especially if you're needing to recruit multiple people. Very quickly, you're starting about up to 25, 30, 35,000 pounds of upfront investment into your staff. So the scale-up visa is to make it attractive. The Home Office have removed this requirement from the category. So there is no requirement to pay this at all. So it's a lot more cost-effective. The actual visa application fee for the route is a little bit lower as well. So all in all, it's a much more cost-effective route to do it. So if you're trying to recruit for senior work, if you're trying to recruit for the people who are looking at above that £33,000 salary threshold, then this is a really good option if you're eligible to be considered a scale-up business in the eyes of the Home Office. It is brand new. It is a very, very new system. There are at the moment 2 businesses which are sponsored for a scale-up visa to be able to issue scale-up sponsorship to individuals. We are in the process of assisting the 3rd company to apply for the license. So we're very much at the vanguard of this area of the visa rules as well. And it's got a lot of attractiveness. So certainly if you're in that space where you would be eligible for a scale-up visa, do let me know and we can have a discussion on how it can benefit you. Certainly a lot of the preconception around the visa is an exceptionally expensive thing to do. This takes an awful lot of those concerns away, in the sense that it removes a massive chunk of the cash that you need to invest into the system. So it is a really good option if you're eligible for it.
So just repeat there, it was 10% growth in turnover for the last 3 years.
Correct. Yes.
Yeah.
So,
although there might be a little
20% growth on average each year. So, and that's for the 3-year period immediately before you apply. And you need to have had 10 employees at the start of the 3-year period.
But again, all starts with that sponsorship license, doesn't it? And that's that's the sort of the key takeaway, that if you have not got your sponsorship license, then please speak to us. But also, if you get that sponsorship license, it is the holy grail. So look after it, particularly if you've got individuals who are leaving the organisation or going on secondment. We need to kind of protect that sponsorship license at all costs. And another change, Chris, and this is one where it sort of straddles that sort of employment and immigration, is right to work. And we've had a lot of discussion, haven't we, around, when things might change. And we saw, I think there was due to be a change in April, but it was put off to September. But what are the definitive changes now?
Yeah, so the Home Office extended the COVID adjusted right to work check rules until the 30th September. So they've only actually really just finished in the grand scheme of things. Mm-hmm. It went on for a long, long time after lockdown restrictions were lifted. Now, the primary reason as to why the Home Office pushed the COVID adjustments back so far, so I'll take a step back for a second. The COVID adjustments meant that you conduct a right to work check over a video call rather than having to do it in person. So, for example, as you're recruiting a British citizen, before the introduction of the IDSPs, which I'll come into in a minute, the only way of doing a right to work check was to provide a physical copy of your passport. Mm. So obviously, prior to COVID, they would come into the office, you'd meet them in person, you'd look at their passport and you'd compare them with their passport. Obviously, with lockdown restrictions, that wasn't possible. So the Home Office introduced a concession into the rules that would allow you to do it over a video call. So using this as an example, if I'm recruiting Emma, and this is Emma's first day of work, Emma would show her passport to me on the screen. She'd also email a copy of it to me, and we make copies and make references to all of this, and that's your right to work check done under the COVID adjustments. So you could still continue to do that up until the 30th of September this year. The primary reason that the Home Office pushed the concession back and kept it open for so long was because they wanted to coincide the end of the COVID adjustments with the launch of what they call the new identity service provider service, so digital right to work checks. So the COVID adjustments basically heralded the introduction of the fact that we could do this remotely and we could do this digitally, and it would make the process an awful lot easier, even once COVID is done and out of the way. So there was a lot of pressure on the Home Office through COVID to introduce a facility in which we could do right to work checks digitally. Now, we can do right to work checks digitally for anyone that holds a visa, specifically that holds a BRP card or status under the EU settlement scheme, because there is a Home Office record of that person's status. So there's a fantastic online system where you can check someone's right to work if they either hold a BRP card or if they have status under the EU settlement scheme. However, if you're British or Irish, then obviously you're not going to have any visa documentation showing your right to work in the UK. All you've got is your passport. And so the Home Office have been grappling and have been trying to figure out a way of doing this over the last couple of years. What we've come up with is what's called the IDSPs. So identity service providers are private companies. There's a whole market of companies that provide this service. And you as an employer can go to an IDSP and ask them to conduct a digital right to work check on your behalf. So this is a big step change away from the employer having to conduct the right to work check on every employee. You can effectively outsource it to an IDSP. So IDSPs go through a big verification process with the Home Office. There is accreditation that they need to meet. There are certain ISO standards they need to show that they've got. So the threshold is very high to become an IDSP. So high, in fact, that it really is only relevant and it's only applicable, it can only really be credibly accessed by companies that already do things like pre-vetting checks and sort of identity checking checks and things like that. So it's a very limited sort of number of companies that have realistically got the skill set and got the technical means to be able to run this. So I think last time I checked, there was about sort of 10 to 15 providers that were accredited to provide the service. So what you can do, you can go to the company and you can say that we want to recruit this person. Can you complete a digital right to work check for them, please? You provide them with the details. They'll go off and make the necessary checks. They have access to various databases within the Passport Office and all the other systems that they already have access to. And then they can provide you with your statutory excuse against civil penalties in the event that person is working illegally. So it is a big step change in the way the right to work checks are done. There obviously is, because it's a free market effectively that the Home Office have created, and it is private companies that are running it. There is a cost structure to the process. So when you engage with an IDSP, there will be a fee that will need to be charged per check. Obviously, the majority of those are run on scales. So if you're recruiting, if you onboard, let's say, 15,000 people every year, then it's going to be a much more cost-effective per unit exercise than if you're onboarding 5 people a year, for example. So it's one of those things. It's not for everyone. Certainly, if you're onboarding not that many people a year, then it's probably not worth going through the process. Just stay with the manual checks that you've been doing before. But certainly, if you have a large recruitment program, if you're constantly onboarding a lot of people, it is a really effective way of managing that process and freeing up a lot of time frame for you and your HR staff. So that's active now. There are the Home Office publish a list of approved providers. If you Google IDSP right to work checks, you can see the Home Office's list of who's approved. Most have already got ads up on Google where they're at the top of the searches and things like that. So there's quite a nice little market that's generating there that does this. And then the other big change to the right to work check system this year was that if you're recruiting someone and they have a visa, so a BRP card, you can no longer just accept the BRP card as evidence of their right to work. You need to get the individual to provide you with what's called a share code that will allow you to then go and do an online right to work check as well. So it's just another layer of verification. So you're not relying on the actual documentation itself, you're then able to access the Home Office records on someone's eligibility to work in the UK. And that came in 6th of April, and so far we're seeing quite good response from our clients with that.
I think just going back to that, the IDSP and the sort of the digital checking, as you said, it's not for everyone, and employers obviously make that choice. And I think the other thing that's interesting is, whilst yes, it can give employers some comfort, obviously that liability, the risk there that you are engaging somebody or employing somebody who doesn't meet the sort of the criteria, that still rests, doesn't it, with the employer?
Yeah, regardless of who conducts the right to work check, the liability still sits with the employer. So obviously, if you use an IDSP, then they will give you the documentation. So based on all of our checks, there is nothing to suggest this person doesn't have the right to work in the UK. Does have the right to work in the UK. So when you go through that process, obviously you can take that, and the Home Office allow you to take that as a statutory excuse. But nevertheless, you still need to go through that process. You can't outsource all of the responsibility to the providers. I'm sure a question's coming from George. Thank you,
George. Yeah.
So
read it out. So it just says, will the government in the future be providing a free digital checking service for UK nationals, as they are doing for EU workers through the share codes? Do you think that's something that we might see, Chris?
Potentially. I think that George, the point around the discriminatory point that you make, I think is quite an important one here, because it is, to a certain degree, by hiring a UK or a British or an Irish national, there is a very different process that's more difficult to go through than if you're hiring a non-British or Irish national who's either had status under the settlement scheme or a BRP card. I think the biggest issue at the moment is technological capability, frankly speaking. The Passport Office are in an even worse place than the Home Office are in terms of their operational capability and clearing backlogs and things. Also, as well, the Passport Office's database, there's a lot of dispute around how accurate they are in terms of, can you just effectively produce a list of everyone that holds a British passport at the moment, type of thing. And obviously as well, you have a legacy issue as well, where you don't necessarily have to have a current passport to prove that you're a British national. So and indeed, you don't even have to have had you can never have had a passport and still use other methods of establishing your right to work in the UK as a British national. So there's a lot of various different ways or things that the Home Office needs to be able to draw into a single database to be able to provide this facility where you can just do it online. Someone can provide a share code, for example. Not to say at all that it's not technologically capable. It is well within the realms of the available technology that we have at the moment. It's just the scale and the size and the number of different government departments that would need to be involved in the process. Just off the top of my head, you would need the Passport Office and their database. You would need the Department for Work and Pensions for the National Insurance number database. You would also need access to a digitalised form of birth certificates, which doesn't exist at the moment. So the various registrars' offices around the country would need to have a digital facility where they can log births and have that translate and have that communicate with all those other systems. So it's by no means is it impossible, but I think it's still a long way off getting the various databases and systems to be able to talk with each other.
Yeah, and political will as well is obviously the other sort of major point with all that, and also not just birth certificates but marriage certificates as well, civil partnership. If you change your surname, I mean, that creates a whole host of issues there as well. So yeah, it's kind of catch up time, isn't it, for these departments. And sort of moving on really to talk about the autumn really, and what we've seen or not seen over kind of recent months. And that picture was supposed to represent flip-flops, although looking at that looks rather nice and warm and holiday destination. So we'll sort of hope for sunnier times. So yeah, you know, I think the autumn's really sort of marred with, you know, flip-flopping and uncertainty really, as well as sort of, you know, huge sort of personal and obviously corporation tax rises that we've seen, certainly in the, you know, in the autumn statement. So, you know, IR35, was it, you know, being reversed back to where it was? So it wasn't going, but what was proposed was that the change that we saw in April 2021, which basically put the emphasis on the IR35 assessment from the consultant, from the sort of personal service company. So, you know, it was basically them marking their own homework and sort of pushing that emphasis there, that SDS, that status determination, onto the engaging company, the client. That was the bit that was proposed to go, but obviously that's now back in play. And I think, you know, from that, speaking to a number of clients who are obviously going to be looking at how they engage with contractors, you know, is there a way that they can streamline the process of doing the SDSs, but also really going back to, well, let's audit again and see who we've got, see how people are working, and sort of taking things from there. So, you know, IR35 is still going to be here. We're still going to have, you know, some sort of knowledge there for our managers, knowledge there for our kind of IT and procurement teams. You know, around what IR35 is and what it continues to mean for your business and your ability to be able to pivot and to get people in quickly. We did, however, see the national insurance reverse last month. That was the health and social care levy. We did see that reversed. But then obviously we saw, as we saw, there's a sort of, you know, income tax and various other sort of corporation tax changes as well. So again, you know, what impact that is going to have on not only, you know, business finance, but also individuals as well. Are we going to see individuals wanting more, you know, salary increases to cope with the increase in income tax rises? Is there a way that businesses maybe need to think smarter about the way they attract, the way that they recruit, and the way that they retain, if money is not always necessarily the answer to these problems? So I think this is going to be a theme running through into 2023. Get in touch with us. We're here to help. There's my email address if you want to raise any sort of HR issues, but also if you want to talk about training. I think particularly training around, you know, how we manage sickness absence, how we manage those IR35 conundrums. I think that's going to be another issue that we need to think about revisiting, as well as, you know, how do businesses, how are we managing our grievances, how are we managing investigations, how are we managing disciplinaries, particularly as we are seeing there, you know, a rise in the amount of compensation that individuals can receive. So, you know, do get in touch. And again, Chris, you know, do get in touch with you as well. I think what I'm sensing is that there are a lot of options out there for individuals, and perhaps they don't realize how they can take advantage of the system. Would you say is that a fair comment?
Yeah, certainly with the cost aspects of the visas as well. There's a lot of nuance in the way that the costs of going through the visa application process works. There's to say misconceptions is the wrong word, but there's a lot of it's very easy to read the headline figures and take that as read and then leave and then think, no, this is too expensive for me. There's a lot of detail in the immigration rules and in legislation around when certain visas are applicable, when they're not applicable, when you can claim refunds. Quite importantly, what costs you can pass on to individuals as well and claw back over the length of their employment with you. What your rights are in terms of introducing clawback clauses into contracts and things like this as well. So it's like any investment, really. There are a lot of ways of mitigating any potential risk that you expose yourself to. There's a lot of different ways about managing where you place that investment and how it's managed. So if you are considering going through the visa process, if you are experiencing staff shortages, the immigration system offers a huge range of options to you in terms of what types of roles you can recruit, where you can recruit from. One of the biggest things that we've had since leaving the European Union is that we now have an immigration system which is exactly the same for every other country around the world. So whether you're recruiting from France or from Spain or America or India or Pakistan or China or America, the rules are exactly the same. So it gives you a really nice, clear, level playing field, and it opens up effectively a global market to you in terms of skill sets and recruitment. So there is a cost aspect to it. It's really important to understand that, and it's important not to downplay that in the sense of this is a free ticket to a global labour market. There is a cost aspect to it, but very often that cost aspect isn't anywhere near what it initially seems to be.
I think some really good advice there. You know, knowledge is key, isn't it, with these situations? So we're doing a bit of a two-parter. We thought we would have a bit of a look back and how obviously that's impacted on business. We'll also have a look, as best we can do, at what we think will be changing next year. So please do join us at the end of January there. And again, look out for invites on your email, but also through social media as well. And I really hope that you can all join us. So Chris, thank you so much for joining me today. Thank goodness you were able to rejoin. That was a moment. So thank you for joining me today. Thank you for everyone for joining. And again, thank you to those who are listening via our YouTube channel as well. That really leaves me to wish you all a very restful Christmas and a prosperous 2023. And Chris and I look forward to seeing you at some of our in-person events, to hearing from you if you've got any HR, employment or immigration queries, and also seeing you next year at our webinar program as well. So thank you so much. All the best. And yeah, see you in 2023. Bye-bye.
Thanks.